Okay, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our retail panel. I see that many of you are here already, so we can get started right away. Very sorry for the couple minutes that we're late. We just had some tech issues, but everything is working now. So my name is Hannah. I run marketing at TokyWoky, and I will be your host for the next hour for this panel on how digital engagement is transforming retail, so both online and in store. For those of you who don't know us yet, very quickly, TokyWoky, we're a tech company specialized in building customer communities for retailers and brands, and we help them identify and activate their most passionate and loyal customers. So obviously, digital engagement is at the very heart of what we do. And ever since the lockdown started, we've done quite a few of these panel sessions with brand leaders and retail experts, and we really wanted to bring you a September update, especially as we're heading into Q4. So a big thank you to our partners over at Baringa, who not only wanted to co-organize this session with us, but who also wanted to share their insights during the panel. So thanks so much, Rob and Lucy. We have 1 hour set aside for this Q&A. So I'll be asking some questions that we've prepped for in advance and that we've received in advance, and we'll try to take then as many questions as we can from you in the time that we have. So just a very quick technical side note before we jump in. We have a chat right next to the screen where you can see us. If you're on mobile, you have the chat if you scroll a little bit. So comment or send your questions as we go. And maybe just to check that everything is running smoothly, if you can send a quick hello in the chat to make sure that it's working. Hi, Karen and Johanna. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us. And Julia and Louisa as well. Okay, it's definitely working. Thanks, guys. So if you should experience any issues during the webinar, try joining the session on Chrome. Usually it's what works best for these events. You'll also be sent the recording after this session, and we'll be sending with the team at Baringa a general recap with the video in the coming days. So even if you have issues staying connected, you will get all the information that we're sharing today. So yeah, I'll start off by introducing today's panel. Today with us we have Helen Baines. Helen is a customer experience leader with over 20 years of experience in online retail, particularly in the luxury, fashion, and cosmetics field. She has previously led the customer experience teams at Net-a-Porter for 15 years and more recently at CultBeauty, including during the pandemic. So hi, Helen.
Hi.
We're also joined by Andrew Regan. Andy has more than 35 years of experience in retail. He's now managing partner at BlueSeed Retail, and he'll be our in-store experience specialist today. He specializes in bringing digital change to stores through staff engagement. And amongst many of his other projects, he successfully brought self-service checkouts to the UK, South Asia, Australia, and New Zealand.
Hi.
We're also joined by Lucy Larkin. Lucy heads the consumer products and retail team over at Baringa. Lucy has over 20 years of experience in retail transformation, and her main focus is helping retailers adapt to the changes of the digital world.
Hi.
And we're joined by Rob Ward as well, also from Baringa. Rob heads their customer and digital team, and Rob has over 20 years of cross-industry experience. He specializes in customer-centric change and digital strategy. He helps organizations design new operating models, adapting to changing customer needs, which we'll talk about very shortly.
Hey, hi everyone.
So thanks a lot to the four of you for taking your time today to share your insights and experience. I thought to kick off this panel, I'd like to hear from you, Rob. Obviously, retail has known some profound changes over the past few months, both in the negative and in the positive. I'd like to hear from you on how consumer needs have shifted during COVID and how has that impacted the industry?
Yeah, what a great question. It has been a crazy few months, hasn't it, for all of us? You know, COVID-19 has had a profound impact on society and on consumers as well. I guess it's something we've all experienced, and we're not through it yet, are we? There's more to come for us all. Like on a serious note, on a human and economic level, it's been difficult, hasn't it? The impact's not been easy for any of us, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come over the years to come. But from a business perspective and a consumer perspective, it's fascinating. I think we're at a time of profound change where consumer behaviour is changing, consumer needs are changing. There's been a profound shift towards digital channels. The role of the store has been obviously very necessarily impacted over recent months as behaviours have changed, and we all get to look ahead now and say, so what does the future look like? And one of the things we've done is to look at, so what's the role of digital businesses and how has digital changed, given this context? And so you look pre-COVID and you think, well, digital businesses were winning, they were attracting capital, they were scaling fast. Think Amazon and Uber and Airbnb and others. And then during COVID, the digital businesses are the ones that have thrived and survived because they're resilient, they're cloud-based, their propositions are largely digital. And again, so many great examples. Think Netflix. Think about how Shopify has boomed during COVID. Think about how Facebook have accelerated the rise of Facebook shops and the launch of Facebook shops. So much of a rise in digital. And then the profound question, I guess, for this group and for this discussion is, so what's the role of digital with stores? What's the role of digital as part of the retail mix as we look ahead post-COVID? So I guess that's the frame for today's discussion, Hanny.
Yeah, definitely. And Lucy, jumping to you, what challenges do you think these changes represent for retailers?
Well, I think obviously there's a recognition, I think, that the COVID crisis accelerated trends that were already there. This shift to digital was already happening. It had been underway for many years. But what this did is it removed some barriers for customers who'd perhaps been reluctant to engage digitally, but suddenly actually didn't have a choice. And I think it also removed a lot of barriers for retailers who have more sort of traditional ways of doing things, ways of making decisions, etc. And many of the clients that I work with achieved things they would never have believed possible beforehand, just in terms of pure digital growth, but also the speed of launching new propositions, which would have taken them 2 years before, and they sort of did in 2 or 3 weeks. I think actually the crisis led to quite an unusual partnership between retailers and customers, in which retailers felt able to launch on a sort of best endeavours basis, and customers were actually quite forgiving. They were happy to be served in any way possible. And I guess one of the examples I would talk about would be pre-selected boxes of groceries, for example. If you tried to launch those before, customers would have been sort of, why I want to choose what I want. But actually a pre-selected box of groceries during the crisis was incredibly welcome. I think the challenge now is now that customers, are customers forever going to be happy with pre-selected boxes of groceries? Well, probably not. So there's either going to be pressure on retailers to add a level of sophistication that they haven't been able to, or sort of customers are just going to have to continue to be forgiving. And I would guess that retailers are not going to be able to get away with some of the things that they were able to get away with during the crisis, and will have to add sophistication that they don't have now.
Okay. And you mentioned how barriers fell for online shopping, online retail. That brings me to you, Helen. You were obviously leading customer experience team at CultBeauty, an online pure player. So maybe it's easiest to go straight to you and ask you, what kind of changes did you see?
Well, I think really picking up on the point that Lucy just made around this, delivering change that you never quite believed possible. I mean, that was definitely the case for our business. And, even as a digital pure play, I mean, it was almost like we went into this unplanned peak overnight. And to see the business rally around the opportunity that this peak presented operationally and scale up to deal with the inbound volumes was really quite amazing. And of course, we saw a massive migration to consumers buying beauty online purely because the stores were closed and the salons were closed. So I think, that was, a clear and very key driver around that. And, just talking about, picking up also on the point of barriers to converting on e-commerce, that's particularly pertinent to beauty, where a lot of the barrier is around the fact that you can't try the product. So although I would say that's maybe more pertinent to makeup categories, but there's still this, that it's such a tactile sensory experience buying beauty, and it really comes to the fore. But obviously people couldn't couldn't do that. So it really meant that that barrier had to be dispelled, and an openness maybe to try new brands. But I mean, we saw, you know, uplifts across our traffic and engagement, and you know, converting into orders were phenomenal. And it was really fascinating to see the focus on consumers really coming to us for specific brands that they were clearly buying elsewhere beforehand. But also, I think what was more interesting, much more interesting, was the shift into buying different categories, and where, you know, for example, makeup had been such a predominant category for so long. All of a sudden, there was this shift into people looking at skincare, but even much more niche categories like body care. I mean, more obviously than the hygiene focus around hands and looking after your hands, and the dryness that was coming from the excess washing. So that was very acutely related to the actual situation. But then it also, you know, with customers that were used to going into salons for treatments, so we would see we saw a real uptick in beauty tools, which is a really niche area, but you know, that's for customers who are really invested in beauty on another level. So for example, the UV face light masks, which I think the entry price is at £500. So you know, that really speaks to the different like variety in customer needs, and what people were really looking for. And you know, and I think that ultimately came from people having more time at home, you know, and savings in terms of time, but still wanting to, this feeling of self-care was a really important factor in this. So whereas you might be going to the salon after work, or you may be going to see your dedicated facialist, if you're more at the top end of the market, you know, people were adopting and looking to replicate the feelings of self-care through what they were doing at home and having time to do at home.
That
so
they otherwise, would have had in store or at salons, for example.
Yeah, as part of that audience would have, you know, would their self-nourishment would have come through that treating factor to going to get my nails done after work. But then you can't do that all of a sudden. Or, you know, maybe you're used to having gels, and then you would have them removed in salon, and then you can't have them removed in salon.
Yeah.
And so, you know, really interesting changes in behavior that really impacted the organization across the board, right from obviously the warehousing, the ability to get the stock out to the customer in the time frame that they expect, delivering a consistent service proposition, right the way through to the inbound contacts of people wanting advice on what to buy. So really like looking at the full end-to-end journey, and obviously products then selling out, still having demands for the products, working with the brands to be able to get access to the products and get them back in, you know, and available to customers again. So yes. Yeah, I mean, like amazing time to have been part of.
So, and everything from merchandising to logistics to communications has been impacted over the past few months.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you say is the biggest challenge for online retailers now that you've had this huge peak of business and new customers?
So the challenge really is around habit. And what proportion of your customers have now created new habits? Where have you removed the barriers that mean that actually they found that, oh, this is an enjoyable way to shop, and I maybe get more from this than I do from battling to go to a store after work or popping in on my lunch hour. So, you know, making that experience more so that it's sticky, so that they come back and they're buying from you again. Mm-hmm. So it's really, you know, how can you nurture that? You're really looking at the nurturing through to the advocacy end of your customer journey. How can you influence that? And then, you know, and then from a merchandising perspective, which habits are going to change again? You're going to be left with excess stock because all of a sudden everybody goes back. you know, what proportion of people go back to their old habits, what portion of people stick with their new habit. That's what's going to be really interesting, and is going to require organizations to continue to listen to their customers and to try and identify like when that change is happening before it becomes a problem to them.
That's super interesting. So Andrew, coming to you and in-store, obviously is going to be very different, massively different challenges than the online perspective that Helen just shared. 6 months in now, after the massive impact of the pandemic on stores, what are your biggest takeaways on, you know, how stores have adapted and what's still to come?
Yeah, I think we're a people business. We deal with people in store and communications and leadership. And I think, you know, the biggest challenge and the one that everybody recognised was getting people into store, getting those stores open and serving the nation, you know, respect to everybody, especially in those first few weeks, that we're in a situation where they didn't know how life-threatening this was, how threatening it was to their families, and yet they turned up, they opened those doors, you know, from a grocery retailer of respect, you know, to deliver food to the nation, you know, when digital really just couldn't cope with the amount of people ordering online. You couldn't get a slot. You've got to get out to a store, you know, keeping people safe, making sure that customers could get what they wanted. We all know that the stores were empty. How do I deal with that? I think our first experience and shock was walking into our local superstore and realizing it was empty. Really, that the news wasn't expanding this, it was empty. And so that really sort of hit home. And, you know, the staff were great. They explained, "I'm really sorry, you know, the orders, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing." So I think the biggest challenge for retailers was communicating out to their customers and to their staff about what was going on, because I'm not sure anybody really understood. And the way that the staff took that challenge on was just incredible. And I think it's made retailers realize even more just how valuable their staff are, to not only, you know, being in store, just working on a till or stacking shelves, but actually communicating with their customers. You know, when we started to see, you know, some great innovation, people that were perhaps moving to scan as you go because they didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to touch anybody. Retailers were then taking that and rolling that out even faster. You know, Asda's and Tesco's, Sainsbury's already had a base of that product and service, but to then roll out immediately, you know, Asda rolled out to all of their stores for mobile scan as you go, to allow customers not to have that touch and that innovation. You know, remembering the staff have got to land that as well, because, you know, you may have never had this in your store. You've then not only got to teach customers how to use this, you've then got to audit customers perhaps every few thousand. There's audits and there's different types of security around it. So I think, again, the challenge was not only delivering the tech, but how do I communicate that to my store managers, to get that to my customers? You know, because we see, you know, typically, you know, 70% of text doesn't land when you don't engage teams in stores. So I think retailers started to do a really good job of communicating with their staff, to communicate with their customers. And I think, you know, retailers really had this challenge, this balance. You know, each of my shopping journeys were very different. You know, if I could order my main things online, perhaps the things I couldn't get online, therefore I had to go to a local store, and if I couldn't get it there, I had to go to a superstore. So, you know, me as a customer, my behavior changed. And, you know, I use the example all the time of my 77-year-old mom. You know, in the first month, she didn't want to see anybody, she didn't want to leave the door. By month 3, you know, the chatting to somebody in the queue at Aldi and talking to the staff was the best thing of the week for her, because she was getting out. So, you know, she chose her store for not only the technology, because she knew there was a good queuing system there. She knew that the touch screens were cleaned every day if she used self-service, but that she communicate with the staff, and that the staff were able to tell her when stock was coming in, when could she get toilet rolls, when was the best time for her to come into store. And I think retailers, again, did a great job digitally of communicating that to their customers on social media, online. But at the end of the day, it was the teams, and the biggest challenge was getting those teams to manage that in store. And it was, you know, let's face it, it was changing every day. And I think it was hard for even retailers to understand what was going on. And
it's still changing every day.
Absolutely.
So, and do you have any examples of a particular retailer that did this super well? And I'm thinking of communicating to the customer, but also communicating and engaging staff internally.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the retailers we work with in the UK, so certainly the major grocers, you know, did a great job of communicating with their staff. They realised very early on, we were involved with some of the early you know, PPE and safety discussions around putting screens up and things like that. You know, that was communicated out to the staff. I think obviously there were challenges of getting stock, getting screens into store, getting masks, getting hand sanitizer, and that was very difficult. But you know, once everybody realised that this wasn't going away, it was going to be going on for months. Retailers did a really good job of communicating to their staff. We do some launch work with Aldi. They were particularly good at communicating with their staff, and their staff in turn were very good at communicating with their customers, and really built a rapport up with their customers and built a lot of trust, I think, with their customer base. You know, as did every retailer. Well, I think we saw that, and we were close to that than anything at the time. You know, and it's now really that continuing challenge is about how do I equip my staff and my management to pivot very quickly. So suddenly I'm going to do a new digital application. How do I pivot? How do I move that really quickly through my people? Because they're the face of your business. They're in store. You know, maybe 40-50% of my customers don't look online. They may not have a Facebook account or you know, any sort of mobile application that's going to communicate with them. How do I deal with everybody in the same way and help everybody on this journey?
Yeah. And when you talk about getting that online and offline mix right, I think it's going to be, I think there's no way of going truly back from the changes that we've seen over the past few months. So we even saw some organizations completely switch business models from a bricks and mortar only to a digital model as well. And I was curious, Rob, if you had any insights that you could share on that, and any examples.
Yeah, happy to share those, Hannah. It's been fascinating, hasn't it? And I mean, just picking up on, you know, Andrew's points around, retailers have had to respond in very different ways, haven't they, in the crisis? And I suppose we've seen responses in three ways. The first is to those who've optimized, right? And I think, you know, exactly building on Helen's points around some of have just removed barriers, just to improve the experience, just to bring core customer journeys online. Others have had to transform their business because, frankly, COVID is an opportunity to catalyze transformation or just require it. But then there are some who profoundly had to pivot because their business model has been so disrupted over the last 5 months because it was predominantly physical, it's through stores. And a brand who I have great admiration for and is Pret and Manger, who, you know, I'm sure many of us who ever come in and out of London will see and know and love. And we were thinking about them, you know, as one of the sort of like a brand that's very close to us in the industry, and their response. And you think, even if we start to commute, you know, 1 day less a week, 2 days a week, like crudely, that's 20%, 40% drop in income, right? And as stores are closed, and as consumers aren't coming in, and even when footfall starts to return, how do you pivot fast? And what I've had huge admiration for Pret to do, they took out, you saw this is in the press, you know, they took out 100 million of additional lending to pivot hard to digital. Those of us who've been up in London will have seen that they've now got a subscription offering live, which is your 5 a day, but 5 coffees, as opposed to what my wife reminds me of, my 5 fruit and veg every day. But they've got a direct to home delivery now through Deliveroo and through other channels. And they've started to build some really innovative digital propositions to bring Pret products and that amazing Pret brand to our home, as well as through the obvious things like click and collect, and starting to think about some of that in-store digital experience. So that brilliant hybrid of physical and digital that some brands have got no choice but to deliver now, because frankly, to survive in the world that we're going to be living in future. And I think Helen's point around, you know, which of these behaviors are we going to see sustain, and which of these behaviors are we going to see retrench perhaps back to the way they were, is going to be really interesting too, isn't it? But I think Pret are realizing that it's, you know, the world is not going to be the same as it was, and I think they're being incredibly bold and courageous in pivoting their business model. Really good example.
Yeah, really good example to follow in the coming months and year especially. So Helen, I wanted to ask you a few more questions. So you shared how CultBeauty was impacted by the pandemic. Obviously, huge spike in business, an unplanned peak season, as you call it. Can you share some of the very practical ways that you adapted your strategy and internal organization? Oh, Helen, I think you're on mute still. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Perfect. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of it was really operation, you know, a lot of the direct impact was operational. So it was how, first of all, it was keeping the warehouse open in line with all of the measures that were coming through. And, you know, we were fortunate in that we had the space to do that, and the team turning around and implementing what was required from a health and safety perspective. So the fundamental need was about keeping the operation running, and then really it fed through to buying and merchandising around being able to maintain the product demand or the supply so that we could keep meeting the needs of the demand. But then I think there were a number of other initiatives that were going on in the business that sort of that landed in tangent with this and were probably expedited a little bit. So in terms of where we were going with our customer service strategy and elevating the role of the beauty advisors that were the specialist arm of the team in the business. So really that actually the coincidence of that landing at that time was incredibly valuable and provided some really organic insight coming into the business just through the daily stand-up meeting that we were operating, and not even on a daily, but I mean, so it was keeping that organic flow of insight in the conversation that was really valuable, that then could be acted on quite tactically by the other teams to make the most of in terms of how we were communicating to customers or acting on what customers were looking for. But it's interesting what Lucy was saying about in other areas, customers being a lot more forgiving, because actually at the beginning of our experience, that was my assumption, that was how customers would react, that they would be more forgiving and like even grateful that we were operating, you know, because but there was no level of that. We didn't really get that sense at all, and if anything it was more on the anxiety side of, am I going to get it even more than we get normally? And you know, when we had a customer base that was hugely engaged, because across the board, customers were really coming to us because they couldn't buy beauty products that they wanted elsewhere. So obviously that was magnified by the pandemic, because whereas before they would maybe be coming for brands that they just not had access to try, now they had access previously and didn't get them anymore. So it actually sort of heightened that feeling of brand engagement that was going on in the final mile, around the anticipation of, oh, am I going to be able to get it? Is it going to get to me? So that was really interesting and really unexpected as well.
And is there any other way that you got those customer insights and use them kind of like a compass to guide short-term decision making?
I mean, really, only really sort of insights from the either coming through from customer service, so anecdotal, or, you know, we're a very socially active brand. Instagram was really one of our key marketing channels, and really it was about the social team being very on top of the conversation, and there again, feeding back through to the business, not just about engagement, but honing into other gems in the conversation that could be actionable or inspirational, as equally they should be if you're listening to your customer.
Yeah, we have we did one of the panels we did previously was with Monkey, so they're H&M's Gen Z brand, a fashion retailer, and what I thought they did so brilliantly during the pandemic is, from the very start of the lockdown, they took to social media and they asked their customers, okay, what are you expecting from us? What do you want from us? And they did so day in, day out, and they even every week. And obviously we're working with them on their community platform, so they did so on social media and through that community platform. And the feedback that they got informed their marketing team, their social team on, customers wanting positivity from the brand, especially in, difficult times, especially at the start of the lockdown, and fashion inspiration. And it kind of guided them every step of the way. And okay, this is what we should offer. This is what we should keep doing. So yeah, I'm hearing that too from you, Helen.
Yeah, I think it's really underestimated the importance of brands actually asking their customers what they want. What do you want from us? And it's not necessarily about taking everything literally and just then delivering that, but it's almost like being able to see through that to spot the trends and spot the spaces where customers are moving into. And I mean, I always say you should be able to anticipate what their next need is going to be before they even know it themselves. That's really what good looks like. But then equally, I think the other piece in that that's so underestimated is the power of asking a customer what's important to them in terms of how they feel about your brand from a loyalty perspective, making the customer feel valued. And it just that power of asking, and then the customer being able to observe and see the actions that you take that relate to their comments. It really it has this incredible halo effect that really impacts on how customers feel about your brand.
Yeah,
not something that's huge. It's not always hugely measurable, and I think this is why it's so underestimated and untapped. But yeah, it's a really important of excelling.
But
it's part of excelling.
It's definitely something that we've heard a lot from clients and from brands that we've been speaking to over the past few months. It's really once everybody was stuck at home and that kind of water cooler conversation at the office was done, they needed to get that information somewhere else. And we saw that the reflex for many companies is actually going to their customers and really using that as a compass. And it's something that we're seeing quite a lot. I see Lucy nodding quite a lot ever since Helen started talking.
Definitely nodding. I think it's really just wholeheartedly agreeing with that point about the power of asking and the power of creating a conversation. It was interesting the point you made about your customers not being forgiving, and I guess it's a difference between being forgiving about just getting your hands on the product at any cost and selection versus the anxiety of it not arriving, and I think those are two different dimensions. But yes, I completely agree with you, and yes, completely agree with that last point that you made.
And so Lucy, I'd like to continue with you for a bit. Do you have any the best things that you've seen in terms of digital engagement over the past months? A few stories that you can share, or a few brand examples?
So, I mean, there've been so many, haven't there? There've been sort of, some of the big fashion brands doing concerts and there've been so many examples of just really exciting engagement. The one that I pick out actually is an example that I experienced personally that really worked well for me, and I think a lot of others. So normally I get my hair coloured in hairdressers, and in lockdown, obviously that was no longer an option, and I had to face the world of home hair colour, which is a bit of a scary one for someone who's never done it before. So basically, I sort of had no idea even where to start, and I found the L'Oreal Tap and Try feature, which I thought was wonderful. Basically, you use it on your phone, you look at an image of yourself, and you can change the shade that you want to try. And basically what it does is it turns something which was really quite intimidating into something incredibly fun and engaging, and even more fun when I discovered it worked on the dog. So I've seen my dog in rose gold. It made it really fun, but it also made it something that I was looking forward to rather than something which was frightening. And I guess for me, it's just an amazing example of how a digital experience can massively enhance the purchasing experience, whether you go on to then purchase online or in store, whatever retailer you purchase at. Actually, the digital experience has taken that product to another level and made it accessible for a whole group of people for whom it might not have otherwise been, and that's why I would pick that out as a particularly good example.
Yeah, your story reminds me of something that we've seen happen on Superdrug. Superdrug is one of our clients, obviously a huge player in the beauty and skincare online market. So we work on them on their community projects. And one of the features that they have on their community is allowing customers to talk to each other. And at the start of the pandemic, and this reminds me very much of your story, we're seeing a lot of questions about, how can I dye my hair at home? I've never done it before. Or a different type of question. I've never dyed my hair. Now, less people are going to see me in the coming months. Is it the time to try something, or maybe something more original? And actually, the great example that we have with Superdrug is that their team was able to look at those conversations, and it links back to what you said, Helen, about maybe not taking it literally, but they listened to those community insights, those customer insights, and they used that to adapt their messaging on socials and in emails, and they adapted their e-com website even to feature hair color products. And they did they did so many things on social media. It was really, really incredible. They invited mental health coaches to share their story. They invited makeup artists to do live sessions. They invited hairstylists as well to give tips on how to properly dye your hair at home. And yeah, I really find that so smart of these brands to see those new habits and those new customer needs, and just fully go for it on social media and on their website, and to say, okay, this is what we're delivering to our customers. So what we've heard and what you've touched on a little bit, Lucy and Rob, at the start, is that we've seen so much innovation over the past few months. I remember speaking at a different panel with Jacadi, which is like a French premium kids clothing brand. And they told us that in 2 weeks, they shipped as many projects as they usually do in 6 months. So insane rhythm. And Lucy, you mentioned that that's kind of slowing down, perhaps. Like, can you elaborate on that? And maybe what would your tips be for retailers to keep that innovative spirit going if they can?
Sure, yeah. So I think I would probably be kind of focusing on a lot of the traditional clicks and mortar retailers with this advice, because I think a lot of the pure plays were obviously born in the digital era and are just more nimble. But for the clicks and mortar guys who were incredibly entrepreneurial and responsive and broke all their own rules in the first few weeks and months of the pandemic, I guess I see a lot of that sort of revert to normal. It takes longer to make decisions. That risk aversion is creeping back in, and it will. I think the only way that you can retain some of the special, entrepreneurial flair that was found in the pandemic is through leadership intent. I think unless there's a very, very clear sense of purpose from retail leaders and brand leaders that they are going to consciously go and look at what they did differently and try and structurally now make that a permanent change, they will revert to type. So it is eminently possible. If you look at how quickly you perhaps set up a new product, a new and urgent product during the pandemic versus how you do it normally, which processes did you bypass? Which rules did you break? Which approvals did you skip? And actually you go back and then question, the value of those day to day. Do you really need those approvals? Do you really need those processes? But unless it's a huge focus, I think that normal behavior, that normal business as usual behavior will return.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe if we can take a step back and look at more macro trends. So we've seen how pure players like CultBeauty were quicker to adapt and were maybe in some way built to thrive during the pandemic in any case. But we're also seeing these massive legacy companies going online, going D2C. And Rob, you mentioned it earlier with the explosion of Shopify and of Facebook shops. What best practices are you seeing from organizations that are switching to that D2C model?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, isn't it? And it builds on exactly what, I guess what we've been talking about on this call, what Helen's mentioned around the importance of listening to your customers, understanding them, of customer intimacy, of asking the question, and of Lucy's question around, just a point around innovation and speed to market, and how do we make sure we don't lose that I think, I mean, there's been a theme that's grown and grown, hasn't there, over the last decade around customer intimacy and customer centricity, really understanding consumers, engaging with them, understanding and building your business for them. And I think that's something that a lot of retailers and consumer goods companies have, I guess, been grappling with, is how do I really get to understand more about my consumers, be more intimate, personalize more, create propositions and experiences which are more personal and more engaging, that engender loyalty, that are going to help me drive growth. And I think that's been more important. That's more important now than it's ever been. I think the last 5 months has taught us that direct consumer relationship, that direct to consumer proposition and business and relationship is so important. Having that consumer understanding, that route to the consumer, that proposition that's tailored and relevant, that's through digital, that has that digital channel, that digital connection, so which persists even when we get disruptions like we've seen in the last few months. That's really important. And it's come up in almost every client conversation I have now is about, Rob, how do we create more of that? I'm looking at Shopify, I'm looking at loyalty platforms, I'm looking at do I build my shop on Facebook Shops? Should I just start shipping product through Amazon and through Alibaba and the big digital players, even if I'm sacrificing margin and consumer relationship, right? And almost everyone's intent needs to be, I believe, to be towards having that consumer intimacy, having the data, having the insight, having that direct digital channel, having that direct engagement, exactly as Helen's talked about. That's the direction of travel, and the digitally native businesses have that. Some of these historic businesses, some of the most amazing brands that we all know, don't have that in their core DNA, and that is a business model question. It's a technology question. It's a culture and way of working question too, which I think is going to be really important for the weeks and months ahead.
I really like the idea about consumer intimacy. It's definitely that. I'd like to jump back to Andy as well, before we maybe take a look at the questions sent from the audience. So how does the store fit into that? Obviously, we're moving more and increasingly online, but we're never going to go fully digital. It's always going to be about that mix between the human and the digital experiences to make it more convenient. What do stores need to do, I guess, to get it right?
I think the responsibility really is perhaps for the digital teams to remember that this is being landed into a store, and the staff are going to have to deliver this, or part of this to the customers. And I think that communication, where we've seen retailers done really well who have pivoted, you think for grocery retail that's not even online, going to click and collect. They had separate teams, separate members of staff in store to allow that to be delivered. They had a separate till for Deliveroo, so there was no pressure on the existing team. They get on with their job, they've got customers, they've got a job to do. More often than not, we see digital landed on a store. Nobody trains a store, nobody gives them the skills, nobody gives them the communication pack to communicate to the customers. And in normal circumstances that's hard, but now I think for every piece of digital that lands in a store, then we've got to really think about how we communicate that to the stores. We're working with a retailer now, and we're looking at their top stores in the country, and we're actually doing a lead-in and change with EQ, so with feeling for their managers. We're coming into a season where we're not only opportunity for more lockdown, more pandemic, but we've got Christmas coming, when people shop like mad as it is. So how do I communicate to my staff about what's going to happen? How do my teams communicate to a customer to say, next time you come in, actually, why don't you just use this? It'll be a lot quicker for you. You haven't got to touch anything. It'll help the queues. Have you remembered, have you get your slot for Christmas yet? Again, communication from head office and digital teams to the stores, and then allowing the stores to then communicate with the customer and get them ready. Effectively sell those applications and those digital services to customers, so that the customers really feel engaged in the whole process and feel like they're getting a really balanced view from retailers that are, as we said, mainly a bricks and mortar operation.
Yeah. Oh, super interesting. And I think also eliminating any friction between in-store and online, making sure that staff in-store is incentivized also on what's going on online, and that it's not completely separate, as that can happen for fashion or cosmetics websites.
Yeah, and you know, that's, we all know, in store, something's ordered, something's returned in store, the store get hit for that sale, that they've got to return it. You know, we work with a fashion retailer where, because their store had a car park, it was a free car park, all the returns in that town went to that store. You know, and on a Sunday, the staff spent all day just doing returns to head office. And so, you know, it was about understanding what incentives were for the teams in store to take on that work for digital. And then also, you know, do retailers offer an opportunity to, you know, to deliver digital through the store? You know, if I order online and I come into store, do I want customers to then buy something else while they're there, or buy an accessory, or the staff to know that they've just bought a particular item? Would you like to think about buying this item to go with that for a Christmas party, etc.? So again, it's that balanced messaging that, you know, a click and collect isn't just about a click and collect. It's about an opportunity to sell something else, to develop that customer relationship in a different way.
I think we can switch to the Q&A portion with the audience. We have a little over 10 minutes left, and we have a few interesting questions already. So I suggest that we start with Johanna's one. So the lockdown also has brought a strong focus on self-care and checking in on each other. How, as a brand, do you approach your customers in a human way and let them know you care? Maybe Helen, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot about showing customers you care, as I touched on before, is asking them what they think, and then showing that you act on what they think, and that their opinion is valuable. And ultimately, a lot of that comes down to the language that you use, and knowing where your customer is and what they, you know, which channels they respond to best, and making it low effort for them. So being where they are. And having that awareness for your brand as a business, knowing where they're most likely to engage with you. But I think, you know, it also comes down to the attitude of the business when you're talking to your customer one-on-one, empathy, your service teams and how they talk, whether it's your floor staff or your customer service teams, the language that they use when they talk to the customers, not making them feel rushed. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done when you've got such a high influx of inquiries. What's the balance between a personal touch in the response to a faster response and meeting a service level? You know, a lot of showing that you care can become down to the operations of maintaining consistent and fast or a consistent SLA, because actually customers have come to expect that, and the perception is that you don't care if you don't respond to your customers, and you don't respond to them fast enough. So I really think that it comes down to the cultural focus on the operation, and the desire to serve the customer need, understand what the customer's needs are, and be unified at cross-functional level to be executing an experience that serves their needs.
Yeah, I think, Johanna, I hope this gave you a good enough answer, in case I found it super interesting. So Joshua, that's going to be for you, Lucy, as he was responding to something that you mentioned about risk aversion creeping back in. So he's interested in what specific areas within retail the pandemic has created a radical long-term shift, especially within fashion, if you know of any examples that you can share.
Well, in fashion, I would say the move towards many more pairs of leggings is probably a permanent one. Comfortable clothes. Actually, I think the jury is still definitely out on this. It's really too soon to tell what's going to be long term. I would definitely take a punt that the shift to digital, which, as I mentioned at the start, is an acceleration of something that was happening anyway. You can't get the toothpaste back in the tube on that. I think the shift to digital is absolutely permanent. The other one I would call out actually is the shift away from cash. And I think that's something that retailers have always been quite wary of suggesting or moving to operate in a cashless environment, because it would, exclude customers, and it, just didn't feel appropriate. The difference now with cash being perceived to be unhygienic, actually, I think is again a catalyst for, actually, and a big opportunity for some different methods of payment and more innovative customer experiences around payment and loyalty, for example. So I think that would be a long-term trend that I would back for the future.
Okay.
Joshua, I hope that answers your question.
Well, in any case, Joshua, if you have a follow-up question, let us know. He says great, so perfect. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to add them, obviously, in the chat. I was looking at Caitlin's question. I think it actually, I think many of you could take this one. So I'm thinking of Helen and Andy, but let me know who'd rather take it. So it's all about you're meeting these new customer needs. You've identified them. You've listened to your customer. And now how do you make that switch internally to make sure that you can actually deliver on those new expectations? So what does that mean in terms of hiring new people, maybe joining several teams? I think, Helen, you touched on this already when you mentioned logistics and merchandising changes in strategy.
Yeah, so I don't think we're a digital first business anyway, so it wasn't really about hiring in specialist roles. But I mean, I think one of the key areas for us was looking at the onboarding process, because we were continuing to hire, and especially into the customer service team, which had to pivot overnight and become a remote working team. And so, the need to be able to hire in or expand the team and instill them into the culture and the expectations around serving the customer were really pivotal. So get them set up remotely. So there's the tech setup, but then right the way through to the product knowledge. And actually that was something that it was one of those classic examples that was always kind of on the back burner, that we knew that we should do and that was important, but it probably wasn't as urgent as it should have been. So I think there's, it's an example of one of those shifts of a job to be done that really moved from being important to suddenly like urgent. We've got to turn that around now. We've got to turn around and execute that and make it work, because we've got this immediate need, and if we don't, it will have an immediate consequence on our customer.
And did you change anything in how you managed contact centers or online support processes beyond moving them remotely?
So we didn't have external contact centers to manage. One of the big changes that we implemented, as well as having to grow the team pretty rapidly overnight, was that we launched live chat. So we launched a new contact channel for customers to reach us through, and we rolled that out with the team remotely.
Wow.
And that was something that had been talked about in the business for quite a while. So there again, I think it was a bit of a coincidence of the two things coming together. But I think also, back to the conversation about risk, I do think on many layers in business that, no matter which business you're in, the risk aversion has been reduced, and the aptitude to test and learn, because the world's kind of gone mad anyway. So let's just see what works. It's a bit of that going on, and that's really positive, as opposed to everything having to be perfect. So maybe being, that can come down to the culture of your brand and your business as well. So you get this obsession around, especially in luxury and in the luxury end of the market, around everything having to be absolutely perfect, as opposed to, do you know what? Let's just try this. Let's see how customers respond to it. Let's listen to what they're saying, and then let's tweak it and make it better. And don't fail fast. So I think, there's been that sort of, I think it has just removed this some layers of risk aversity. And, you know, as we've all said, that it's not actually then even just down to which consumer habits stick for the long term, but it's also about the different brands and the internal teams, and actually how do their attitudes, do they remain being progressive to embrace this change, or do they just go back to where they were?
I think one of the things
that's going to be really interesting.
One of the things that's really interesting that's come out, isn't it, is Andrew talked about sort of EQ and the importance of colleague comms and engaging colleagues, and you know, and Helen's talking about, you know, the speed of innovation, the speed of change, and trialing things. It's actually there's a word in there which lots of our clients talk about now, which is empathy, which is how do you create that connection between the colleagues? This has been hard for all of us, you know, people working on the shop floor in customer service roles, you know, Helen and others, right? To create that empathy and that human connection, and deal with some of the difficult conversations that are being had with consumers and customers too, when there's that move to digital too, and that combination of digital and human, you know, that application of empathy to digital contact, you know, through web chat, Helen, or be that through other digital channels, that's going to be part of the golden source, I think, for the coming months, right? Is to make sure we can create that real connection with consumers through digital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to comment, that I think something that Lucy said we're seeing a lot more of now. We're working, you know, high level, doesn't matter whether you work in digital, head office, in store, is purpose. What is my purpose as an employee now? You know, one of the things we're seeing is my purpose to be a digital content maker, is my purpose to be a shop assistant, or is my purpose to enrich the lives of my customers? You know, that's a real deep feeling. That's a different reason to get up in the morning. And I think companies have got a responsibility now to look at their purpose, look at the mindset and the behavior of their team, and help their teams, help their mindsets, help them do their jobs, but give them a real purpose and a real different way of thinking about customers and their roles and everything else. And that, you know, that's a massive shift for a company. But I think, you know, COVID and all of these things has helped companies make that. Why not do it now in this situation, to make that massive shift in thinking?
Yeah, and I think it applies to any industry, whether you're in retail or not. It really comes down to empathy with your customer and with your employees or your colleagues. So yeah, I really like that recap almost of our talk. Helen, I'm seeing Lindsay's question. Is there any customer feedback that you can share about your new chat functionality? And then I think we can end the session on that overview that you just gave, Rob.
I'm just trying to think back. There's nothing actually that stands out that springs to mind that I was aware of. It was, yeah, we didn't have anything specific and overarching that came back through that channel in particular.
It was just another touch point for them to reach out to your brand and get answers to their questions, I guess.
Yeah, it's all about offering the channel of choice to your customer, right? And that's right for the demographic.
And being closest to them as you can, yeah. That customer intimacy that you mentioned, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think that's it for this panel. Again, massive thanks to the four of you for the insights that you shared. Super interesting. I hope that our audience really liked the session, and thank you so much for tuning in. So as I said, you'll be getting a replay as soon as the webinar ends, and with the team at Baringa, we'll be working on like a more general overview that we can share with you, and the video that we can share with you with some insights, and hope that you will tune into our next sessions. And thanks a lot. Have a great day, everybody.
Sounds great. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.